going to be starting off with step 4 and going into step 5 of the Pops Fiero build. Now in these steps, as you see here on the instructions that I'm going to put right here on the screen, step 4 involves installing the axles and rear sway bar as one assembly onto the engine, into the transmission and into the drivetrain, while the engine's already on the subframe. Now, we have the engine on the subframe here, and you can see right here on the transmission is where the axles are going to mount. Very simple assembly, as you see on the instructions, that they just kind of slot in on the transmission and get glued down to the subframe. No problem. My issue is how to make them interesting, because this is also going to include the springs and the shocks, or the rear struts that we're looking at here. And now it's time to make them visually interesting, so I've got to figure out what I'm going to do here to make these look realistic but interesting. And such as what I did on the chassis, where I highlighted the details and created a lot of visual interest by just highlighting all of the details and all sorts of bits and pieces that are on the chassis, so that it makes it, visually interesting to the eye, gives you something to look at other than just a big black chassis. So now it's time to do that to this. So I haven't figured out exactly what my paint scheme is going to be here, but I've got something in mind. So guys, we're going to keep watching. Oh, wait a minute. I just noticed something. This has these are the tie rods in the back of the engine. I'm assuming that this is what this is supposed to represent. That's attached to the sway bar, which is not really how the real car is built. After all, the real cars, I don't think they didn't have rear sway bars. So this is not really representative of the actual car, as these tie rods were bolted right to the chassis. I mean, right to the subframe, not exactly to a sway bar like device here. So this isn't exactly accurate, but nonetheless, we're going to make it work, and we're going to make it something that's going to be visually interesting to look at. So give me a few moments here while I try and come up with something that's going to look interesting but real. Alright, so now we're going to just cut out the parts we need so we can get started. Alright, so here we have our rear assembly, and we're going to see how that's going to mount. Alright, so that's just going to slide into the transmission like so, and slot into the control arms like so. Now it appears to be that one side is just a little bit longer than the other, so we're gonna have to fix that. But this is going to be the basic mounting position, and then this slots into the two holes in the subframe like so. And there we have our assembly attached to the subframe. All right, so let's see what we're gonna do with this. And this is Alex Fiero there. Whoops, let's not drop our engine. Okay, so now I'll take you through my thought process on working out how I figure what I'm going to do with these pieces. I like to first clean them up, and then I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to make this look as real as I can while still keeping it interesting? So as I'm working, I'm just thinking about what I can do to make this interesting visually. Now, I know that most of these parts aren't, you're not going to see too much of them, but it's one of the fun parts of modeling for me. So now I'm going to shut up while I clean this up and do a little thinking. I figured I may as well prep the front suspension parts, as they're on the same tree. So here is the front knuckles, and although, as I stated once before, one of the places where this kit is not very accurate is in the suspension components, as these front A-arms are not really representative of what's in the car. But we're going to go with it, and we're going to make it look nice. As you can see, there's not much in the way of flash on them. They're very nicely, crisply molded. You can see all the little details in them. It's really actually a very well-made kit. Alright, now that we've got all of our parts prepped, we're going to start applying some primer, getting ready to paint these little pieces, as we're going to try and detail them all as much as we can to make them look really interesting. So hang out while I paint a little bit here. Okay, now it's time to add a little color to these parts. I'm going to start off by using Mission Models Yellow, which is a really great paint. Fortunately, they only come in flat colors as far as I know, but they make a great clear which you can spray on right afterwards. These are water-based, easy to spray, with a little thinner from Mission Models as well, and they cover very well. So we're going to start painting the shocks here, and you'll see them turn yellow. Alright guys, now we're back to continue the detailing of the rear suspension components. We'll just concentrate on these here. As you can see, the paint came out fantastic. Decided to do these components in the dark aluminum, as I thought the contrast of it might look pretty nice under there. I mean, it's not the most accurate suspension in the world, so I thought the dark aluminum would just give you something that would be a little more visually interesting when you're looking down into it. Now, for the rear struts, I decided to go with yellow, as I remember the original struts in these cars, I think, if I remember right, and I could be wrong, were Monroe-matics or something like that they were called, which the Monroe struts were originally yellow in color. And I don't know why I remember them being in Fieros, but I do, but I could be wrong. So we have the struts painted yellow, and now we're going to detail out the springs. And this is painted in dark aluminum, and we're going to be doing a little detail painting for all the rubber boots that are on the tie rods and on the axles. And then we're going to detail out the spindle assemblies on the back of the wheel hubs. Haven't decided what we're going to do about the wheels yet. But we're taking this one step at a time. So let's do a little detailing. Okay, now for all of our boots on all of these suspension components, on these components here, we're going to be using the Tamiya F85 Rubber Black. I love this color. It's the same color that I used on the, I don't know if you can see that there, the hoses at the end of the coolant pipes there are done in the rubber black. It's just a really good color when you want to depict a rubber-like material. Fantastic color. Now, Tamiya paints are notoriously hard to brush paint. What I found is that you put a drop of their paint retarder in with their paint and brushing them becomes a breeze. I mean, they just kind of just flow really nicely onto whatever it is that you are painting. This paint retarder really comes in handy when it comes to their paints because it just dries a little too quickly. Now, painting small components, generally I just use what's in the cap. I'm going to take a drop of the rubber black and just put a little drop of it into the cap. Not of the rubber black. I'm going to take a drop of the paint retarder, put a drop in, we'll go 2 drops. And that'll keep the paint flowing pretty smoothly and make it usable for much longer than it normally would with these Tamiya paints. I mean, if you're used to the Tamiya paints, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. That they dry way too quickly, which makes them a pain to use. A pain to use paint. Haha, see what I did there? Alright, we're going to do a little bit of work now. Here we go. We have all of our boots are painted now. Now we're going to try and see what other details we can add to this. And as you can see, the Tamiya paint flowed very nicely. And there we go. The paint retarder works very, very well. Very happy with the performance of that with the retarder. Makes brush painting with Tamiya's a joy. Okay, now we're just going to use the Model Masters brass to highlight our fittings on the edge, on the ends of. And this is what I'm talking about, creating visual interest. You can see all the different colors. There's 1, 2, 3 different colors there, which give you more, 4 if you count the brass. Which, as I said, give you something a little more to look at than just a single color, which would have been much easier. Alright, just doing a trial fit of the part after the paint. And I'm kind of happy with the way that looks. I mean, yeah, is it... you know, realistic to a fault? No, it's not. But neither is this rear suspension. And I think that the axles and that sway bar painted a different color just look kind of cool back there. What do you guys think? Really does make everything much more interesting to look at back here. So I think that's going to stay. We're going to add the springs to the struts, and we're going to take a little bit of a shortcut here. We're going to do this with our Sharpie. With the Sharpie, we can get clearly defined lines. So there are all manner of different ways to get your detailing done. Don't let anybody tell you that there's just one way about this. And there we have our springs. Right, can we see this? You guys see that? There's going to be a little more detailing done to this, but for now, that's going to take care of that. I'm going to do the other one now. And then we'll come back once we give this a little bit of time to let the ink dry. Looks pretty darn good if I do say so myself. That's nicely done. Okay, so now we have jumped all the way to the engine install. Now, I couldn't film that as there is quite a bit going on when you're installing the engine in this car that makes it quite a little bit complicated to film and install at the same time. Although I think I may have done it on my last build of this car. But let me show you what I'm talking about. When you're installing the engine in this car, there are multiple contact points which you're going to have to be aware of. You have the 4 glued contact points on the subframe itself, the 2 in the front and 2 in the rear of the car. Then you have the 2 where the struts, the rear struts, contact the spindles for the rear suspension. And then you have 2 more where the rear struts have to enter the chassis. All of this while maneuvering the engine into the car, and all of the extra details that I added to the engine just added to the complexity of installing it. As you can see, all of the brackets here and how much space they took up. As the air conditioning bracket actually leans a little bit over. Won't interfere with installing the interior, but it does lean a little bit over into the firewall. Not noticeable once the car is put together, but that's also one of the reasons why I had a little bit of trouble putting it all in. So now, all of the suspension components that you saw me painting, here we have the struts, bright yellow struts in there. I really like the yellow in there because it really stands out and gives you something really to look at. Here you can see the pseudo sway bar and the toe links attaching to the hubs there. So as I was saying before, all of these different colors, which is one of the reasons that I chose to go with everything with these different metallic tones. You can see the axles now. They stand out a little more. Add a little bit of Tamiya panel line paint just to bring out, accent some of the details, such as the folds in the rubber boots on the axles themselves. Makes them look a little more realistic. All adds to giving you just a lot more to look at underneath the car. So let's take a look at the entire chassis with the engine already installed. As you can see there with the rear suspension. How much more interesting this is now that you can see all the different colors and variations in the suspension. It really brings out the details. As you can see, the different colors I used in the rear struts. Well, we'll have yellow for the struts, we have the brass for the lower spring perch, and we have titanium silver for the top hat. As I said, most of these details won't be seen again, or very much of, once the car is all together. But it's pretty cool to make them and put them in there. Paint it all up. So now the engine is fully installed into the car. And let me tell you that those 6 glue points, the easiest way I've found to do this is to install slow setting glue, like the tester's old tube glue, and let it get really tacky. Install the struts into the spindles, and then lower the whole thing onto the chassis. Because the slow setting glue will give you time to move the struts, as the mounting pins for the struts on the top, you're going to have to move the struts into the mounting pin. So you don't want a super quick setting glue that's going to harden before you get everything lined up and installed. But there we go. The engine is now in the car. And time to start working on the interior and get back to the body. As there are going to be a lot of details that Greg requested that would be in honor of his dad, and that's the kind of stuff that I got to start working on now, which should prove really interesting. So keep following me on this journey, because it's getting really to a really cool point right now, and I just love looking at all these details. I gotta admit, it's my favorite part of the hobby. All right, guys, that's it for this round. We have the suspension and the engine done, and now we're going to start moving on to the interior and the body. I'll see you on the next one.